We want to, on behalf of the panel, say thank you to SBA and the community for recognizing this important topic. We are very excited to be here tonight. We want to also acknowledge there is very limited literature out there that is specific to spina bifida and obesity or weight management. And so we are excited that we can have more advocacy for this area. As you will see here, we could talk about this for a long time, but we're going to condense it down to 1 hour. And we're going to cover an overview of weight management. We're going to talk about nutrition, activity, and some current research. And then as noted, we do have 2 sessions in February that we're excited to go over questions and answers with you. I know you already have this, and I want to point out the importance of this. SBA in 2018 published guidelines, and they published 25 of them, and they are on the SBA website. And I believe you have a link for this specific one because it's related to nutrition, metabolic syndrome, and obesity. And it is a great resource, so I highly encourage everyone to review it. This slide here is just to talk a little bit more in depth about the prevalence of obesity in US adults. And this was done in 2022. And I think the important point of this, it's more to show that we do have an issue. And I think we're all here because we know that there's an issue with obesity prevalence in our country, and it has only increased over the last 30 years. So it is a way to represent it visually. What's important about this slide is that it is showing us obesity and not overweight and obesity. So it would be even higher if we combined it with overweight also. Another important point on this slide is that you see variability in the colors by geographic regions or by states. And that's what's interesting about obesity is there's a lot of variability, even not only where you live, but also some internal or individual characteristics that we'll talk about. So the prevalence, like I mentioned, we do not have a lot of specific information just for spina bifida, but we do have good information in the overall population. And it's almost right now, about 3/4 of our adults are considered to meet the criteria for overweight or obesity. Of those that are considered obese, there's a subset that would actually meet the criteria to be considered severely obese. And that's a concern because we already have a problem with obesity. We don't want people getting heavier. As noted, we do not have specific numbers related to spina bifida, but it's estimated up to 64% could be considered to meet the criteria for obesity. When we look at children and adolescents, the numbers are still concerning. A little over 1/3 of our children and adolescents are considered overweight or obese. Similarly, with their obese category, we do have a subset that are meeting severe obesity guidelines. Now, again, we do not have specifics related to spina bifida and children and adolescents, but we do have a study that we can talk about that our team did. It was published last year. And what it did is it looked at children and adolescents who participated in the National Spina Bifida Patient Registry from 2009 to 2018. So over 7,000 individuals. And of those individuals, almost 50% met the criteria for overweight or obese, and non-myelomeningocele, about 1/3 were considered overweight or obese. So we know that there is a problem. The numbers are not as specific for all because these numbers here even don't represent all of the population of spina bifida. They only represent those that were involved in those clinics. So it's helpful, it provides insight, but it's not the end-all number. We want to be very clear tonight because I think when we talk about weight, it's a very inflammatory concern. It really creates a lot of emotions. And we want to make sure that we're all under the same guiding principles for our talk. First of all, we know that weight management is not easy. It's very complex, and the reasons that it's caused are multifactorial. If it was easy, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we are in. We also want to acknowledge that weight management is very individual, and what works for one person may not work for another person. In addition, we know that obesity that is initiating in childhood will often continue or worsen as the child moves into adulthood. So it's really critical that we start early on these talks. Prevention is always preferred over treatment just because it's a little bit easier. Once the weight is on, it's harder to get off. That being said, we want to note carrying excess body fat does not automatically infer that someone has poor health, but the evidence is very clear that carrying excess body fat is associated with poor health conditions or secondary comorbidities. So it is a critical priority topic. And last, we are not talking about losing weight or optimizing weight for appearance. We are really promoting health. When you look at obesity coupled with the diagnosis of spina bifida, we do know that individuals with spina bifida are at the same risk for obesity-related comorbidities as typically developing peers. We also know that obesity will present a greater risk for muscle loss, pressure sores, depression, surgical complications, and decreased participation in physical activity and socialization. Finally, and most importantly, having obesity with spina bifida can hinder the individual's ability to reach their highest potential for independence. It may increase the need for assistance with transfers, ambulation, self-care, and activities of daily living. And that is our priority, and that is what's driving this talk and needing further work in this area. So when we talk about weight categories, what we really want is not to know so much about what someone's weight is, but we really would want to know body composition. And what body composition is it's looking at the ratio of fat mass to fat-free mass for the individual. And if you think about that for just a moment, everything that is not fat, so bones, organs, muscle, tissue, etc., that's all fat-free mass. We want to know what that ratio is from the fat to the fat-free mass. In addition, in the perfect world, we want to know where that body fat is located. We know that excess body fat around the abdominal region puts us more at risk for those secondary comorbidities. So when you've ever heard about apple shapes versus pear shape, that's what it's referring to. So our goal is that we would like to be able to assess someone's body composition and the placement or distribution of their body fat. We would like to be able to do this consistently and repeatedly over time so we can monitor trends so we know when to intervene. We also, to do this consistently, want to do it in a clinical setting. And to do that, we need to have something that is cost-effective, easy, and expeditious to do. So it's a big ask, and currently, we don't have a great answer. What we do have is a body mass index. If you're familiar with that, it's often referred to as BMI. It's a very simple math calculation that takes into account someone's weight in kilograms divided by their height in meters square. As time has progressed, all of our electronic health system charts will do this automatically for us, or you can do it online by yourself with your own weight and your height. In adults, what will happen is that BMI calculation produces a number. And let's say the number is 27. That number will align with a table that gives us categories of weight. So a 27 would be in the category of 25 to 29.9, and would have that person be considered meeting the criteria for overweight. In children, it's a little bit different because children are growing. So that number of 27 would have to be plotted on a graph that would be specific for that child's age and sex. And what that does is it turns it into a percentile, and there's a few extra steps involved, but it still allows a category or weight status to be put on that person. Now, I think you maybe have heard there's some problems with BMI. No one loves the BMI. So that being said, I'm going to say we agree. It is not a perfect tool. One of the biggest concerns that we have with the BMI is because it takes into account weight and height, it does not differentiate muscle mass. And you might have heard the criticism that if you had an athlete that was highly muscular, they may look like they're overweight or obese based on a BMI because their weight is higher, but it's muscle mass. So when using a BMI, it's really critical that you use a little bit of common sense with it. The numbers are just giving a proxy for a body fat, and they are not, we know that they're not specific or 100% accurate. Now, the same issue can happen. If someone has too much muscle mass, it can be inaccurate. But if someone has too little muscle mass, that BMI also can be inaccurate. The major con, it is created based on norms of the general population. And as an individual with spina bifida, that would be a major concern because it's not apples to apples. Another concern, you can tell from the calculation being height and weight that there's a high reliance on the height measurement. Two concerns with that. Number one, we know that there are individuals with spina bifida that have shorter stature. So using their height is not going to be as incomparable to the general population. In addition, we also know that there is sometimes are inaccuracies when how the height is measured in a clinical setting. So it's really critical that that height is done in a standardized fashion and it's done consistently. Now, I've pointed out all of these negatives, and you're going to say, why do we even use a BMI? Well, quite honestly, it is not perfect. And if used with some common sense, we can use it for a purpose of monitoring trends. If we do it consistently and as accurately as possible over time, we can start to see trends emerge. And if there's a huge shift or uptick, that can be a concern, or vice versa, if there was a huge change for the less. So it's a talking tool that allows you and your healthcare provider to monitor and to have that conversation. Last thing I will say about this is with height measurements, we know that if an individual is not able to stand safely, there are alternate height measurements that can be done. And most commonly, you're going to use an arm span, but they also sometimes will use recumbent height or other heights. This slide is very busy, but it has a lot of important information on it. The take-home message of this slide is that obesity is the one diagnosis that is so scary, because if you think about your body, it's broken up into systems. And if you want to call it cardiovascular system, endocrine system, respiratory system, and so forth, obesity is the one diagnosis that has the ability to affect negatively almost every system in the body. So that is a major reason that we want to prevent obesity from happening in the first place. I did highlight 2 of these circles in red. I think for the whole population, it's a very big concern that we're becoming more aware of how weight can be not only stigmatizing, but it can lead to some mental health concerns or contribute to mental health concerns like depression, social isolation, anxiety, and low self-esteem. In addition, from a very major priority for spina bifida, it affects the skin. It will affect and cause poor wound healing, pressure sore risk, soft tissue infection. So another reason to place this at a high priority of concern. So how does overweight or obesity occur? Well, I think we have heard it's too much going in and not enough going out, or there's an imbalance between intake and output. Talk about this a little bit more because that is very oversimplified. We want to recognize that that's oversimplified. Every day, energy intake and we have energy expenditure occurring in our body. The energy intake is calories consumed. Not as simple as it sounds, because not every calorie is equal. There are different qualities for calories consumed. So important on what you're eating. But in general, calories consumed go in, and then we expend our calories through energy expenditure. Energy expenditure is made up of a few different components. First of all, we have our resting energy expenditure, and that is about up to 60, 65, or even 70% of our energy expenditure is based on resting energy expenditure. And that is just the basic needs that our body has to function. So breathing, circulation, it takes a large amount of our energy expenditure. Physical activity is the next largest component, and that could be about 25% of our energy expenditure, sometimes a little higher. And that is made up of 2 components. It's purposeful exercise and general physical activity. So if you think about that, we can make a choice to do purposeful exercise, and that might be wheeling or walking around the block or going to the gym. But in addition, if you think about your day, you're doing activity all day long, or hopefully doing some form of activity. So if you park further away from the grocery store, or you have a job that requires you to move more than sitting sedentary, that's general activity. So those 2 combined will be another component of energy expenditure. Finally, the act of digestion is about 10% of our energy expenditure every day. So that includes everything from chewing down to absorbing nutrients to expelling. And that whole act of digestion, like I said, about 10% of our energy expenditure. For our children, they are growing, and that is another piece of energy expenditure, a very small component. And we do not have that luxury as adults anymore, so we lose that energy expenditure. Factors that can affect energy expenditure can be age, sex, activity level, body weight, muscle mass, many different factors, some controllable, some are not. When we talked about how complex obesity or weight management is, it's really because it's not just based on the individual. This is a great model called the socio-ecological model, and it can show you visually how complex this can be. If you look at this model, it's really showing that there's interconnected relationship between systems. So the individual is always interconnecting with their interpersonal life, organizations, community, and then the government part, or the regulations or policies. All of those will play a role and interact with each other and create unique circumstances for that individual. In this situation, we can outline how that relates to obesity or weight management. So from an individual level, race, genetics, gender, age, level of lesion, mobility, all play a role. Your interpersonal level is your household. If you think about that, your environment that you have created, your family, your spouse, significant other, your peers that you are with, role modeling that is either done for you with your peers or as children, parents are great role models. Then you have your organizational level. Most of us are outside of our homes and we're doing school or work every day. Does that school life promote activity? Is there opportunities for activity or phy ed class? Does that work life promote sedentary activity or physical activity? The community we live in, is it wheelchair accessible, safe, walkable? Are there access to food? It's called a food desert when you don't have close by local fresh fruit options. And then you have the government regulations, laws, and policies that affect us on a daily basis without us even thinking about it. So back to the individual. We know that genetics play a huge role, and we can thank our parents or curse our parents for that. We also know that the individual characteristics, level of lesion, demographics, mobility will play a large role. Hormones. We are starting to hear more and more about hormones, with oftentimes talking now lately about medications. There are many hormones that will influence our fullness or our hunger. And some of those that we hear about, insulin, ghrelin, leptin, GLP-1. Behaviors. What we do every day. When we wake up in the morning, do you look at your phone first or do you get up and move? There's a choice in everything that we do throughout the day, and those are all behaviors that we have control over. And oftentimes when we're thinking about weight, we're thinking about activity and nutrition behaviors. Our culture that we grew up in or the culture that we live in does definitely affect our weight and weight management. And then the environment. Foods available. Are we supporting physical or sedentary activity? We are talked about to have an obesogenic environment. And what that means is our society really promotes excess weight. If you think about that, just a few examples, fast food restaurants are everywhere. Portion sizes are extremely large or more than what we need or have grown over the years. Technology has automated so many things that we do not need to move as much as we used to. Packaging of products. It's really hard to tell when someone is saying that Lucky Charms are healthy when we know that they're really not. But it's very hard because the packaging is very, very challenging to see through. So treatment options, lifestyle, medication, surgery. Those are really the three mainstay of treatment options. And not all of these are available for everyone for many different reasons. The point I want to make first and foremost, lifestyle. Lifestyle is the foundation behind weight management and overall good health. The behaviors that we have control over are so critical. So what we can do on a daily basis related to our activity and our nutritional intake, quantity and quality are important. The environment that we set up for ourselves are very critical also. And even if there were an option for medication or surgery, lifestyle is going to be used in conjunction with those options. Medications, we have heard a plethora of information lately as there's new medications coming out for weight management, and there's many different options. I predict that we will continue hearing more options as it's obviously a moneymaker, and we are learning more about how these medications can be useful when they're combined with lifestyle change. There are many side effects to be noted, and specifically a lot of GI side effects. There's a large amount of cost at this point, and we really don't know the long-term outcomes. This is just being initiated, and it's been picked up by the media, but we do not have long-term studies, nor do we have studies related to spina bifida and the newer medications like the GLP-1s that are being talked about. And medications are beyond GLP-1. There's also medications from back in the previous times of just amphetamines or different other medications. So there is a spectrum of options available. Surgery. Bariatric surgery has been around for quite a while and has advanced throughout the years. Some of that is not as invasive as it used to be. Essentially, there has been proven benefits of having bariatric surgery for a subset of people. Again, this may not be something that is even available for everyone, but it is an option out there for some. And the negative complications, expensive and also requiring ongoing changes are something to be noted. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Joanne Whalen to talk about nutrition. Thank you.